This is a story about my son's murder. Rhys, growing up, he was really cheeky. He had a really good sense of humour. He had absolute tons of friends. Rhys had no fear, and I think that's why he enjoyed doing things like his BMX. I think he was a good role model for his younger brothers and sisters. I was told then he started selling cannabis to the friends that he was smoking cannabis with. I can only assume it was so that he could fund his habit, and also he was buying parts for his bike and things like that. I tried so hard to get him to stop doing that. I got told then he was also dealing cocaine and pills as well. And then his dad contacted me one day and asked me if I could pay a drug dealer some money that Rhys owed, because Rhys had been raided by the police and had all his cannabis taken and he owed the money. At that point was when I really found out how deep Rhys had got into this, and it wasn't just him selling to his friends anymore. He was really doing it for a living. I would pay the drug dealer off. He would then come and work for my company to pay me the money back, and it was only half a day, so then he had the rest of the day to then go on his BMX, as he liked doing, but I wanted him to pay the money back. He needed to see that there was a consequence to his actions. He was working the debt off and everything was going okay, and then one day I went into the factory and he wasn't there. He messaged me and said, I've got a new flat, I've got a brand new flat, and I was so happy for him. I never heard any of this from him, but I was told that he got raided for drugs at that flat and was thrown out. I think he'd got into trouble with the police at some point for dealing drugs, and he was supposed to go to community service, but he never went one time, and then he was then wanted by the police. I only found this out because it came up on my Facebook newsfeed with a mugshot of Rhys saying he was wanted. It wasn't a very good way to find out. My jaw hit the floor because I thought, what on earth is happening here? It was actually one of my friends on Facebook who had shared the picture of Rhys. Because we had different surnames, she didn't actually realise that was my son, and she'd shared it to try and help catch him, I guess. I was too embarrassed to even tell her, what you're doing, that's my son. I texted him straight away and I said, are you okay? What's going on? And he said, I'm all right, Mum, don't worry about me. Rhys was 23 by now. He was living in the flat in Northampton for around 6 months. He'd made some new friends over there. I didn't know any of them. He was still dealing drugs. He used to come over to my house every Sunday. We used to get a takeaway or just sit around watching TV. He'd bring his girlfriend. I'd given up asking him about where he was living, what he was doing, because it would just push him away. And I just wanted to see my son once a week. And I felt like if I kept pressuring him, I'd lose him. But on the 1st of February 2019, 5 people went to the flat that he was living in and they kicked the door in. There was 2 rooms. One room had his friend whose flat it was and another friend. They were in that room, but they'd barricaded it. In the other bedroom, Rhys was in bed with his girlfriend, and there was another friend who was staying on the sofa. 4 of the 5 people were in that room. 2 of them had knives, and Rhys was stabbed 22 times. 3 of his stab wounds were fatal, and he had bruises and cuts everywhere, slashes all on his hands and feet where he tried to defend himself. I was told that they went in there to rob him of cannabis, but he didn't have anything, so they only got his phone and £10. They were in the flat for around 2.5 minutes and they inflicted all those injuries on him in that time. Ambulance came, the police came. Rhys didn't leave the flat alive. He actually died at the scene. I got a phone call at around 3 o'clock in the morning from my ex-husband, and I knew something was bad. Something bad had happened because he never called me. But he said, Rhys is dead. Rhys is gone. And I just kept saying, what? How's that happened? What's happened? And he kept saying, I don't know. They're not telling me anything. The police were at his house, and that's all we knew. We didn't know if he'd been shot, if he'd been stabbed. We didn't know anything at this point. I just kept saying to my ex-husband, that won't be Rhys. It won't be Rhys. They've got this wrong. Check his tattoos, because he had a tattoo that said mum on it and my date of birth. So I said, check his tattoos, it won't be him. And they said they've checked and it is definitely him. I just remember screaming. I was just screaming, not my baby. By this time, my husband had sort of woken up and he'd grabbed the phone off me to talk to my ex-husband just to see what was happening, because he couldn't make any sense of what had happened either. I ran through the house to the other side of the house because my older daughter, Georgia, who she was pregnant at the time, I was banging on her door, and when she opened the door, I just threw myself at her and I said, your brother's dead, your brother's dead. And she was then screaming. We were both just absolutely hysterical because of the noise. We'd woken up my other daughter, Lily May. She was in bed asleep. She was only 9 at the time. I just sort of screamed at her, your brother's dead. I didn't even think how to break it to her. I have to break this to her slowly or anything like this. I just blurted it out, and I regret that so much. And she was then screaming and crying, and Rhys was the only person who had any injuries in the flat. 2 of them had barricaded themselves into a bedroom, so they were safe. His girlfriend, actually, she got cut and she had to go to hospital to have that stitched. The person who was on the sofa pulled the covers over his head, so they didn't actually know he was there. The police caught 4 of them within 3 days. When the police came round and we sat there talking to the family liaison officer, and I kept saying to him, you're never going to catch them, are you? You're never going to catch them. I couldn't even help them with their inquiries because I knew nothing about Rhys's, his lifestyle or who his friends were. And I couldn't help them with any of that. But for them to catch 4 of them in 3 days was absolutely, I can't tell you the weight that was lifted just knowing that they weren't walking free. And then a few days later, another one was arrested and charged as well. So we had to go through a long 6-week trial. It was 6 weeks of hell. That's the only way I can describe it. To sit in a courtroom and watch a machete being passed round with your son's blood on it, without any prior warning that that's going to happen, is just, that will stay with me for the rest of my life. 2 of the accused had prior knife offences. One had actually been in prison for using a knife, and they were both on bail for using a knife. They actually got charged for that crime after Rhys was murdered because they managed to get enough evidence after Rhys was murdered. I kind of resent the police for that, because had they have charged them for those knife offences before Rhys was murdered, they would have both been in prison and Rhys would still be here. Only one of them showed any remorse. The other 4 were laughing and joking and making fun of us. They got sentenced on the 1st of November 2019. The 2 main ones, the ones that had the previous knife offences against them, one got 34 years, one got 31 years. Then the other 2 got 28 years each. And then one of them, who didn't go into the flat, he was the driver, he got 14 years. Life for us now as a family, I can only describe as broken. My daughter, who was 9, who's now 12, she self-harms. She gets into a lot of trouble at school. She's very angry. My younger son, he's fine. He was 7 at the time, and it kind of went over his head. I do worry about him that one day he may explode when he does finally work out what's happened. My daughter, Georgia, she went through a lot when she was pregnant, because she was about 16 weeks pregnant when Rhys was murdered. And obviously that took a toll on her pregnancy. But she got her little baby boy in the June. I think that's kept her going. I'm so glad he arrived when he did, and I think he was a gift, really. My son Josh, I worry about him. He is kind of a closed book. He doesn't like to talk about what happened. He doesn't talk about it with me or anybody else. But I know that he does get angry about it. And I do worry that he's just going to explode one day. You've got the grief, yeah, but you've also got the trauma of it happening, the way it happened, the way you found out. You're mourning for this lost child, but you've got to keep all your family together and make sure they're okay as well. Since Rhys has been gone, I've been angry a lot, angry at the people that took his life, obviously. I've been angry with myself. Why didn't I try harder to stop him? Things go through your head like, why couldn't I protect my child? That's my job as a mum. I've been angry with the people that were there in the flat that could have saved him, maybe. You know, the person who pulled the covers over their head on the sofa, the people who barricaded themselves in the room. I was angry at the police because if the two that had the previous knife offences had been charged, they would have been in prison. It's just constant anger. I spent a lot of the days not getting out of bed. I'd just stay in my pyjamas. I didn't want to see anybody. I was scared of meeting somebody new and they saying to me, how many children do you have? Because in my head, I knew what I needed to say to them, but I couldn't get the words out about what had happened. So I didn't know if I had to say I've got 5 children or 4 children. And how do I say it? Or if I got 4, but 5 or 1 died. And I didn't want to make people feel uncomfortable. Rhys's body was kept by forensics for quite a while. I think around 5 or 6 weeks. It was just waiting around and not knowing what was going on. We had victim support come and visit us. And they advised me, they said, just go and have a look around some funeral homes. That did actually help me a little bit, just going around and looking at the crematoriums and speaking to the funeral directors to try and see which one I would actually like Rhys to go to. I was writing lists constantly for everything. And I started writing lists of the family members of all the people who had murdered Rhys. I was trying to find all their family members, not to do anything to them or approach them, but just so when the time came for us to go to the trial, I knew who all of those family members were, who they were there to support. Probably a strange thing to do, but it passed the time away for me. If my brain was busy and I didn't have time to stop and think about the seriousness of what had happened, I think that's what got me through the first couple of months, really. The day of Rhys's funeral, it was just like I wasn't there and I was just kind of watching it from outside. I don't really remember much of it, really. It was like a blur. I remember having to stand up and talk about Rhys in front of everybody, and I remember everybody cheering. And also I played a really funny video of Rhys dancing to Hey Ya by Outkast, and that made everybody go from crying to laughing. The worst part of the funeral, because we were having Rhys cremated and they put the curtain round, and I felt like that was it then. That was it. It was final. And I think at that point it registered that I wasn't going to see my baby again. That was a really difficult bit for me. For the first 3 years, I care about anything or anybody. All I wanted was my baby back. I lost my business. I lost my home. I didn't want to get out of bed. The expression would be wallowing in self-pity, but I'd lost my son and I didn't feel like anybody understood. In the UK, there's a knife angel. It's a big sculpture made from knives. I think it's 100,000 knives. The knife angel moves around the country to towns where they have problems with knife crime, and it stays there for around a month and then goes off to another town. It came to the town, Northampton, where Rhys was murdered. So I went and there was a vigil in the church. I went to that. I lit candles. I put a poster on the railing saying Rhys was murdered in this town by a knife. And I stood around the angel and I spoke to people about Rhys. And I got asked to stand on the stage and talk to people about the impact knife crime has on families. And I'd never done anything like that before, but I agreed to do it. But then on the day, my 2 daughters, they decided that they wanted to do it too. So they got up on the stage with me. Everybody was crying, and I hoped that I just got through to even one person. I could have saved a life, just one person if they'd just listened to what we said. But when I came away from that, I felt stronger, like I could do something like this again, but better, more prepared, think about what I'm saying more. I was going on a family holiday for 2 weeks, and I decided when I came back that I was going to start a charity, and that's what I did. I started the Rhys Foundation. We're raising money to provide a respite for families that have lost a child through murder or manslaughter, and we're also raising funds to provide families with funeral costs associated, because it's so unexpected. The one thing that we struggled with, we had the initial shock of what's happened to Rhys, but then the panic sets in. How am I going to pay for this? That's what we want to help families with. So we've launched the foundation, very new charity, literally just launched. On the back of that, recently I've been to a prison, which was scary because I've never been inside a prison. And I got to talk to the prisoners about the impact this has had on our family. And I was expecting them to laugh and joke and not really take me seriously, because that's what I saw from, the people who murdered Rhys, in court. That's how they were. They listened to me and they were asking me questions, and they even gasped when I told them the length of the sentences that they got. And I know that some of them would have been in that prison for knife crime. So I'm hoping that when they leave that prison, they don't take that route, and they think about what they're doing and the impact, that the ripple effect that will have on not just the victim, but the victim's families and their friends, and how it affects everybody. We've got social media now, and I'm linked up with other anti-knife crime groups and people, and we're like a big family now, and we're like an army. Let's call us an army, and we're trying to fight knife crime. That's what we're doing together. The more I share my story, I think the more chance I've got of just saving some lives. I just want to save some lives. I want to stop this from happening. It's helped me a lot to talk about it. Don't hide yourself away like I did, because I ruined 2.5 years of my life being shut away. I lost my home, my business, my car, everything. On top of losing my son. They take your son, but don't let them take everything else. You've got to be stronger than that.